Mr. Klassen.
Mr. Marangella, good to see you.
It's another beautiful, lovely day in Town, or at least on our way to Town. Yes. And I think that we're going to have some interesting insights and reflections today. A major magazine publication known as Guitar Player Magazine, probably one of the most esteemed and long-standing print magazines, and now also in digital formats in recent years. I think for many years was a trusted and very established source of information for guitar players. And I think over the years has done certainly more good than harm. But today I came across a article that's called Best Pedalboard Power Supplies of 2023, the quietest, most effective way to power your pedals. And it was written seemingly for somebody who wanted this information in 2013. And the recommendations are such that I actually think that it is not in the best interest of guitar players. And I can't exactly see why they made the recommendations that they did. And we, I guess, will unpack it throughout the course of the episode and go through some of the details and some of their findings. And they kind of rank order the power supplies from, I think, like 1 to 10 or something like that. And, you know, my concern here, as somebody that is also trying to make sure that the roads to Tone Town are paved in solid gold tone, is to make sure that we are educating people properly on the right power supplies. And we have a wonderful episode that's just about power supplies. But I think when articles like this come out, it sort of undermines the work that a lot of the people are doing out there in the world to try to really enhance people's understanding. And when these articles come out, I'm not sure if this is a staff writer for the Guitar Player Magazine or if they have staff writers or if it's all sort of, you know, contractors. I'm not sure the way that they structure it. But, you know, we can't just take advice on power supplies from anyone, just the same way that we don't take open heart surgery advice from our auto mechanics. You know, they're just not they're the right people to fix your car. They're not the right people to fix your heart. You need to go to a heart surgeon for that, and that's Agreed. What those people train to do. Yep. You know, just the same way that heart surgeon probably couldn't fix your transmission. So we need to go to the right person for the right questions. And I'm a little bit surprised and also disappointed at some of these recommendations. But if you're curious about what this article is, it'll be linked in the show notes. It'll also be in the description below if you're curious about what the article is that we're referencing. And I don't think I'll just be clear. This isn't a indictment of any of the companies with which they mention. I think that on their own they have merit. I think sometimes the biggest issue is that there's been quite an evolution in power supplies in the last several years that sort of have made some of these supplies irrelevant, or at least problematic in the way that we use pedals and the currents and voltage that pedals are in today's pedalboard world, that sort of nullify some of these picks as good choices for most guitar players. So I guess we'll get into that. But before we begin, Grant, any just first impressions, sort of things that we want to preface our deep dive into this article with before we get there?
My first thing I have to mention is that we are a Chairman down today. As you may have, if you're listening, you haven't heard Brian pipe up with a dad joke or comments on triple filtered water, and I think we're all a little bit worse for it. So Brian is actually in the middle of of an ice storm right now in Texas, and so he can't actually make it into the shop. So obviously we miss Brian, but he will hopefully be back as soon as the ice thaws next week. But other than that, I mean, yeah, I was a little shocked by the article, to be honest. And Mason had sent me this article earlier saying, what do you think about this? Check it out. And as soon as I started reading, I was very curious when this was written. because it does not feel like a current article. And so obviously we're going to get into that more, but yeah, a little bit perplexed how an article like this could be written in such for 2023 when it really does not encapsulate what we would experience as pedalboard builders on a week-to-week basis. So looking forward to getting into it, Mason.
Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen here. So for those of you that are watching on YouTube and want the most enriched multimedia experience, you can view it there. And then, of course, if you're a listener, you'll have to imagine some of these pics. And most of them are fairly standard. So I think if you're familiar with the ordinary array of power supplies, you probably have some idea what these look like if you haven't owned or seen one yourself. And I'll do my best to describe the specifics of the power supply choices here as we go through and sort of unpack what this is. So move into screen share here. And I'll make sure that this is nice and big so that we can see it whole screen. So the title again of the article, and this was written right at the turn of the year in December, I guess giving us all the best power supply recommendations as we turn into the new year. It says the title reads, Best Pedalboard Power Supplies 2023, the quietest, most efficient way to power your pedals. Well, we will be the judge of that. And this was written on December 6th. It says, say goodbye to unwanted hiss and ground loop hum as we count down the best pedalboard power supplies for your budget and explain why you might need one.
And then for the listeners, right below that, a whole bunch of click-through links to purchase now, which will probably come up later in this chat.
Yes, lots of click-through links here. We cannot confirm or deny that the purpose could have something to do with that of this article, but we want to give them the benefit of the doubt. It goes on to say plugs aren't necessarily the most exciting of purchases. However, if you've got a selection of pedals and you want them to run as quietly and efficiently as possible, then you'll need one of the best pedalboard power supplies. Now, Grant, you had mentioned to me before we started plugs. They say plugs aren't necessarily the most exciting of purchases.
First thought.
These are not earplugs.
No, they are not. My first thought on this was, as soon as I was into the first sentence, like, do I have the right article and was this written by AI? Because this does not seem like the vernacular we would use around what I can only assume they're meaning as wall warts. You have one pedal or one daisy chain, super cheap and affordable, but not necessarily a great way to power pedals. I think that's what they mean by plugs. But yeah, I was confused right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting choice of words. But, I wonder if this is like, this person maybe is from the UK or something in there, and that's a common term that maybe we just don't hear very often.
Maybe.
Perhaps.
Benefit of the doubt.
It goes on to say, a good quality power supply will ensure that you don't get unwanted noise interfering with your precious tone. And it will also ensure that your pedals are getting enough power for them to work to their full potential. With the huge variety of pedals on offer, you'll find that the best pedalboard power supplies cater for as many different stomp boxes as possible. You might have some low current 9-volt pedals like distortion or a boost, alongside a big multi-effects unit or a powerful digital reverb. This might need around 300 to 400 milliamps or run on 12 volts. Luckily, there are some great power supplies out there that can cater for all of them. Anything to debrief there before we move on? This person actually may be, British or from, a Commonwealth country. Just some of the terms like on offer. That's not something typically we say in North America. But this is making me think that the plugs thing may be a UK or something type of
This
thing.
is making me, I don't know if you've ever seen a sommelier, documentary or anything, but I feel like, you know how they'd say, this wine is sweet, this wine is tangy, this wine is whatever. I feel like we're at the end of this, we're going to be able to pick out a single person that wrote this article. This person is from the UK. This person is
We're going to say old world.
My only thing, I think this would have been true to what they're saying maybe 5 to 8 years ago. In what, like, the only red flag in this last paragraph is they're saying big multi-effects units. There's no big multi-effects unit I'm aware of that can run on 300-ish milliamps. They're all up in the 800, 1 amp plus. Like, things have grown exponentially in power requirements the last couple of years. Or at least for what people are trying to power. Now that we have switch mode power supplies available, now it's, can I get rid of all my wall warts or all my 2000 milliamp, individual supplies or something like that. So that's the only thing I would say here, again, that's a little misleading, is if you have a big multi-effects unit, you're really going to need to spend a lot of time thinking through power requirements and really planning it out. It's not as simple as 300 milliamps, you're sorted.
Yeah. So it goes on to say, best pedalboard power supplies, guitar player's choice. And when he's saying guitar players, he's not speaking of just guitar players. In general, he's, I believe, speaking on behalf of Guitar Player magazine. There are some really good options on the market at the moment. Ironically, these are all options that have been around for 10 years. However, the best overall pedalboard power supply for us is the Walrus Audio Phoenix. It's got 15 isolated outputs covering a range of different voltages and currents, meaning you can power pretty much any pedal out there. If you're running a smaller board or you're on a bit of a budget, but you've got some fairly serious digital pedals on there that draw a lot of current, then the Slymon Ojai is one of the best power supplies. Whilst it's got 5 9-volt outputs, each one of them offers 500 milliamps, plus there's the option of expanding it via the 24-volt through jack. So they've already established the best one according to Guitar Player magazine, not the author.
They've given away the punchline. Right
the Walrus Audio Phoenix, and for the smallest, they prefer the Ojai. And then there's some click-through links here on Amazon. So they gave it 5 stars. They have a picture of the Walrus Audio. It's got 5 stars. The best power supply for a big mixture of effects and pedals. 15 outputs. 8 9-volt at 100 milliamp. 4 9-volt at 300. 2 switchable 9 and 12 volt at 100 milliamps. 1 switchable 9 to 18 volt at 100 milliamps. Universal power switching, no, because it's not switch mode. Reasons to buy, it's got 9, 12, and 18 volt operation, plenty of isolated outputs, high quality. Reasons to avoid some higher current outputs would have been nice. It says, for pedal fanatics, the Walrus Audio Phoenix might well be the best pedalboard power supply out there. It has a whopping 15 isolated outputs, meaning you can power more than a dozen pedals with their own dedicated voltage, so you don't only hear the noise that you want to hear, and not any unwanted background hum or hiss. Ideal for both stage and in the studio. The Phoenix has a variety of different voltages and currents to cater for all sorts of different pedals. 8 of them are 9-volt 100 milliamp. Another 4 are 9-volt 300 milliamp to cater for your more power-hungry effects. Then there are 2 outputs for either 9 or 12 volts and 1 for 9 to 18 volts. It's put together really well. The cast metal casting will see it last for years on the road. And as soon as you pick it up, there's no question of its premium quality. Well, this is just a Hammond die cast.
Looper enclosure. Yep.
Anybody, you could go get one right now off of Love My Switches or Small Bear.
Yeah.
It's not like a custom casting or folded enclosure. The Phoenix is great for pedal boards that house a mixture of effects. Most of your pedals will require relatively low current. However, you've still got plenty of room to cater for more powerful units that draw more current. It's also nice having the 9 or the 12 and 18 volt options there for slightly more unusual pedals. First of all, this is not a knock on Walrus, because I think at the time that this came out, the standard for power supplies was using what's called a linear power supply that uses some sort of like toroid or R-core or C-core transformer. It is limited by today's standards by a mile because it just doesn't put out very much current. The highest current outputs are 300 milliamps. So
that'd be enough for a Strymon timeline as an example, but barely.
Is 500 across the board. Now, I guess I could see where, this is $279 for this. This is, if you got, let's say, a CS12, right, from True Tone, I think that those are like around 170. That's got 12 outputs. It's got a heck of a lot more current. I think it's got a couple of amps worth of current on board. I mean, I don't see how this is the best buy or the best based on it being 2023. Again, this isn't a knock on Walrus. This is just saying that, I mean, on a feature set alone and the noise factor, Chalks, Strymon, True Tone already blow this out of the water in terms of specs, in terms of the noise, the fact that they're switch mode and can be used anywhere in the world. And I don't remember that all the outputs are isolated on the Walrus. I thought that some of the 9 volt stuff was shared, but maybe I'm not remembering that.
That's a good question. I haven't spent too much time on this one either. Most of our customers end up switching over to, like you said, Strymon or Chalks for power when we do a setup for them.
One of the big problems too with using a linear power supply, and there's several that they recommend in their top 10 list, is that ordinarily most people that are using these power supplies are putting them underneath a pedal board, or a pedal board that is designed to mount the power supply beneath pedals. And anytime you're using a linear power supply like this, the transformer creates a magnetic field, and the pedals that end up in that magnetic field tend to exhibit some really strange behaviors and often have quite a bit of noise as a consequence. And companies like Voodoo Lab had done a good job at trying to mitigate it for a time by using steel enclosures, which help reduce some of the effect of the transformer because it's offering some electromagnetic shielding. This enclosure on the Walrus is made out of aluminum, so it has no electromagnetic shielding whatsoever. And so when you're putting it underneath a pedal board, you're putting your pedals right in the path of the electromagnetic field, and especially with even just running cables through it can often create excessive noise that a switch mode power supply just doesn't have. And for anybody that is using a pedal train style pedal board or anything where the power supply mounts underneath, you absolutely should be using a switch mode power supply, because you don't want to put your pedals or your cabling or anything like that anywhere near where the magnetic field of the transformer is. And a really good test that I used to do to see where the electromagnetic field was when I had to use these sorts of power supplies because there weren't other options, is I had connected an old single coil pickup to a guitar cable and a 1/4-inch jack, and you could hold the pickup over the power supply and you could start to see the intensity of the magnetic field. And the thing to know about the magnetic fields on these is the more current you're drawing against it, the more the magnetic field intensifies. So if this has the ability, let's say, to do 1.5 amps, the closer you're drawing to that, the worse the magnetic field will be and the more noise that will be present if you're putting any pedals near this power supply. So I would say that this is certainly not in my top 10 based on what's available today, not because it's not a good supply. I'm sure in certain contexts it would be fine. But the way that guitar players use pedals today, the current draw of pedals today, the size of pedal boards, the size of power supplies today relative to this, like a Chalks is 1 inch high. if you get any of their latest switch mode power supplies. I just don't see how this competes in any way, shape, or form with other things. Any last words you want to say about the Phoenix before we move on to their pick number 2?
No, I mean, I think if you have the Phoenix on your board and you got some noise, then just move it about 2 feet away from your pedal board and you'll be totally fine. Good to go.
That's it. For 2, they put the Slymon Ojai, the best PSU for small but powerful pedal boards. It's got 5 outputs at 9 volts, 500 milliamps. It is switching. You can expand it. It says this more compact offering from Slymon is one of the best pedalboard power supplies for those with only a handful of effects. With 5 fully isolated 9-volt outputs, each offering a massive 500 milliamps. You've got enough juice to cater for the most power-hungry pedals out there. It's an all-analog circuit. It's all-analog circuit means that you get 2 stages of isolation, so expect this to be an incredibly quiet unit. No ground loops or AC line noise here. Another thing that makes the Ojai one of the best is its automatic power compatibility. So whether you're running it on 240, 120, or 100 volts, you're still going to get good clean power to all your pedals. This is an absolute must for touring guitarists. Another nifty feature is the ability to combine more than one of these together. The Ojai has a 24-volt through jack to expand your setup with another unit so that you can carry on using it even if you add more pedals to your board. Now, some people will consider switch mode actually digital. I don't know that I fully... I guess technically everything in there is I guess you wouldn't call it a digital supply, but there were some people in the early days who used to call the difference between linear and switch mode analog and digital power supplies, which is confusing also because there was a power supply called the Pedal Power Digital, but it was fully analog. That was made by Voodoo Labs some time ago. I agree that this is a good power supply. I think one thing that they don't say is that you have to have like basically a giant computer charger to be able to power this thing up. Like it doesn't just power out of the ether. So you need to be able to have a power supply input by way of where basically some of the circuitry of the power supply is living in this giant module that has to exist in a separate power cord that plugs into the wall and then plugs into this thing. So you need somewhere to put that where it connects to the mains. So it just doesn't, power up with a 24-volt input. If you, for the first one to start, all of the subsequent power, if you expanded it, is drawing off the mains. And then you're just, distributing it out to other power supplies. But as far as the power supply is concerned, I like this power supply. I think that, the Zuma is great. The Ojai is great. All of their supplies are great. They're quiet. They're switch mode. These should all be in the top 3 power supplies as just like a series, in my opinion, compared to anything else that's on this list.
My big issue here, this being a top 10 list or whatever it is, top power supplies of 2023, is out of their whole line. Again, Strymon's had power out now for 6-7 years, something like that. I'm not sure. Is they picked the power supply from Slymon with the least amount of features on it. There's the R30, which is basically the Ojai with switchable voltage. There's the R300, which has that power brick built into it. So you really only do need the one power supply. And then there's obviously the Zuma, which is the 9-outlet version. So this again just makes me really skeptical of how are they really going through this list and choosing power supplies? And my skeptical, the negative side of me, which I'll put away in a second, would say that this is a lower cost option from Slymon and might get better click-throughs into Amazon, which will get them a little bit more money for affiliate links. Because the Ojai is awesome, but I would say practically on builds, 90% of the time, the Ojai is an add-on to the Zuma or an add-on to an R300. And so... I just think that this could have been done better.
As a standalone. I'll say that. Before we get on to their next recommendations, I want to break for a second to talk about a few of the sponsors that make the show possible every week. The first of which is our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary, and Brian Omilion, who is not with us today, of course, is housed in the Guitar Sanctuary and builds all of his pedal boards through there. But in addition to having Brian Omilion on staff and building all the rigs there, they also have amazing, amazing gear, from guitar to amplifiers to pedals. They sell all the high-end boutique stuff and also some of the mainstream brands like Gibson and Fender. And it's just one of the best stores in the country for selection and variety and having really, really great stuff at seemingly every price point. So highly recommend that you check out our friends over at the Guitar Sanctuary, theguitarsanctuary.com. In there, you can find all of their offerings in addition to Brian Omilion's pedalboard services. So all the gear that you buy, you can have them put it together in a beautiful rig for you and have it delivered directly to your own home. Also, Sweetwater's Gear Exchange makes this show possible every week. And the Gear Exchange is sort of an amalgamation between Reverb, Craigslist, eBay. It's basically a third-party site where you can sell peer-to-peer all of the musical equipment gear that you are not using or maybe you want to trade up with. This is a great way to not only sell your gear, but have it on a safe and secure site. And the coolest thing about Sweetwater comparatively to a lot of the other companies that you might sell your gear through is that if you decide that you want to keep all of your profit on a Sweetwater gift card, you don't have to eat any seller fees. Normally, the fees on Reverb can add up pretty quickly. If there's credit card fees or PayPal fees, and then there are listing fees, you can often lose 10% of the sale or more right through just the utilization of their process. In the case of Sweetwater's Gear Exchange, if you keep it on a Sweetwater gift card, if you're buying stuff regularly like I am at Sweetwater, it's a great way to make sure that you keep all of your profits and you can use that to buy more gear. And I just think it's a really cool system. I've already bought and sold a bunch of stuff on there, and I'm really happy with the service. And again, I think it sort of combines the best elements of the things that I like about Reverb without the things I dislike about Reverb, and kind of has more of a peer-to-peer feel, like a Craigslist sort of thing. But of course, you have the safety of Sweetwater backing you up, and their platform and customer service is, of course, top-notch. So highly recommend you check them out. Sweetwater.com/used. We'll take you right to the Gear Exchange. You can set up an account for free and start selling or buying right away. Grant, let's get back to our screen share here. Let's see, where did I do with my... Here we go. Oops. I'm trying to find my article. Best ways to power. Are you seeing the screen, Grant?
I am seeing a black screen. It's a good color black, but it's not the article.
Interesting. There we go.
Perfect.
I figured it out. All right, so we did the first two, which were the Phoenix and the Slymon Ojai, but let's move through a couple of these. Again, we don't need to spend a ton of time on every single one of these. I think maybe we can gloss over a few of them and just kind of give, maybe just the name of the supply. The third one they offer is the Friedman Power Grid 10, and Dave Friedman serves all your pedal board needs as long as they're 9 volts. I would actually say that this supply is actually underrated, and a lot of people don't know that it exists. It really was more of an accessory that came with the Friedman pedal boards. And that was kind of like a unique pedal board system that kind of was almost like a bridge between a trailer trash, if you remember those, and kind of a pedal train, and it had sort of tiers to it, but it didn't have anything that would lift up. They were actually made, or at least for a time, they were made by the same company that makes our pedal boards, Fix pedal boards. And I think now they're made somewhere else, but I think for the first few years they were made by them, and possibly even some of the mechanical side was maybe done in collaboration with them. But I actually think that this is a good power supply. It is switch mode. As they say here, it only offers 9 volts at 350 milliamps, so there are some limitations, of course. But I actually think for what it is, it's actually a well-built power supply and doesn't get talked about very often. I don't know that I would say that it's better than other supplies out there just because of its limitations in the 9 volts. But as far as like the build quality and the pedigree of guys like Dave Friedman, and he's kind of one of the OG rig builders, I think it's a good supply. I don't have any objections to it. I don't know that I put it in the 3rd spot just because of the limitation of the features, but I don't think it's a bad supply.
And this would be switch mode as well?
This is switch mode, yep.
Yeah. So none of that noise you're talking about before.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think they say that in here. Oh yeah, they do. They say universal power switching. Yes, they do say that. They do say that. So again, I think here, I don't understand why they put it here, but okay, let's move on to 4. Let's see what they got. Number 4, they have the Chairmen DC10. And while I endorse Chocks and on almost all my rigs, I'm actually using a combination of either a Chocks 7 and 4 or a Chocks 7 and 8. The DC10 represents the old style Chocks, the Chocks that existed before Chocks was available as a switch mode power supply. And I believe even Paul Chalk, the owner of Chocks, would tell you that the switch modes are tremendous improvements in that they are switching. Now, they say that this is universal power switching, and there is the ability on the older Chocks to have a slider switch that allows you to change the voltage. But I think it only changes between European and US. It doesn't do like Japan.
Yeah.
And so it's not a switch mode power supply. So when they put universal power switching, I think that I think that they lumped that in because either they weren't sure that it was a switch mode or they saw the slider switch and they presumed that then that must mean it was a switch mode power supply. This is not. The DC10 is a linear power supply. And it takes certain precautions. I believe it is a steel chassis, so it does offer some electromagnetic shielding, which is great to have if you're going to have a linear power supply. However, compared to the Chocks 7, 8, 4, that whole series of expandable power supplies, sort of like how Strymon Zuma is, those, in my opinion, are some of the best supplies out there and far exceed what the DC4 or the DC10 is able to do. And they are super low profile. They're 1 inch in height. They are dead quiet. You can Velcro them to anything. They don't need, you can mount them, of course, with the hardware, but they're so lightweight and so compact that you can really just use dual lock and you'll be totally fine with them. I just don't think that this is the right pick of Chocks if you're going to put Chocks in the 4th position. He's got much more advanced supplies than this that kick out 660 milliamps at every single output and have dip switches that you can select between 9, 12, 15, and 18 volts on every single output. And so I just don't see how something like this, it feels like they didn't do their homework. To put this one in there and instead of, it just doesn't make sense to me. Anything you want to say about Chocks in the number 4 position?
Totally agree. The 7, 8, and 4 are incredible. The other thing that I love about Chocks, I don't know if you have ever had an issue with one of their power supplies, Mason, but I've just never had one fail. They are just rock solid power supplies. And so as far as if I know one of our customers is going to be absolutely brutal or they're touring, 150 days a year, there's no question what power supply I'm going to recommend, and it would be one of these ones right here. Even their old stuff, like the DC10 and the chocolate and all those, just built like absolute monsters. Yeah. So that's one of the big things. The one thing I will say, if I was to add a downside to the Chocks, more so on the newer stuff, the 7, 8, and 4, is the layout. The IEC comes in the same side as some of the power outlets, which if you're mounting on the side of a board for easy access, that can make it a little awkward. Yeah. But that's a pretty small price to pay in comparison. And then, of course, the only other thing is the RCA jacks instead of the 2.1 mil barrels poses a little bit of you need to work around those a little bit. But again, they just don't seem to fail. They just do a very good job. So if longevity and features and weight, if all those things are important to you, there's no question that this would be right at the top.
They're great supplies. And technically, the RCA is a better connector than the 2.1 millimeter barrel in terms of the quality of the connection. It's non-standard for our industry.
Yeah.
All right, 5. They have the Voodoo Lab, Voodoo Lab's pedal, or he put Voodoo Labs, but it's Voodoo Lab singular, Mondo. A supercharged version of the legendary 4x4 power supply. I mean, this is another one that I don't get. So 10 years ago, this was the power supply to have, but it has the same issues that I described with the Phoenix, where it's a linear power supply. If you put it under your pedal board, you're going to risk some noise. The more current you draw against this thing, the noisier it's going to be, because it's going to be intensifying that magnetic field. And this one is not made out of steel like their other power supplies are. The main reason why that's so is that this generates a lot more heat because there's a lot more power. And steel you can't use as a heat sink, whereas you can use aluminum as a heat sink so that you're able to absorb some of that and dissipate some of that heat that's generated by the increased power that this larger supply has. The consequence of that is now you have no more electromagnetic shielding. And there were some complaints that I know that I had lodged with Voodoo Lab, and I know other rig builders had as well, about, this change had created some issues with noise in terms of proximity of pedals to the supply, where it wasn't such an issue with the Pedal Power 1 and Pedal Power 2 and 2 Plus. But moreover, I don't know why they put this on here as a choice when the Pedal Power 3 is a great switch mode power supply and has expandable options with the X4 and the X8. There's the Pedal Power 3 Plus, there's the Pedal Power 3. These are all beautifully made, excellent power supplies, lightweight, high current, high power, and again, can expand them out to additional supplies. I just don't understand why we would go backwards to this when there's so many better, lighter weight, higher power offerings that are already in existence from Voodoo Lab. What do you say, Grant?
Yeah, I don't really understand it, to be honest. It's just an outdated list. And so I think these days it's fair to say, if you are a company building power supplies and you don't have a switch mode option with high current outlets, you are now caught in the past. And this would be the exact same thing. It's big, it's bulky, it's noisy. I don't know why you would choose it. I just don't.
I just don't get it based on what else is out here. All right. The number 6 is the MXR M238 ISO brick. So this is kind of like the silver brick style power supply made by MXR. This is switch mode. It does, however, require that you have that the power supply that comes into it, which I think is like an 18 volt input, has some of the power supply features that are housed inside of where the mains connect, and then it brings it down to DC and then comes into the ISO brick. So you have to know, if you get this, that you'll have a pretty substantial external power supply cable that has to come in, that has a separate sort of box that where the mains attach, and then it brings it down to DC before it gets into the power supply. Sort of like how the Ojai would be.
I'm pretty sure for this one, though, correct me if I'm wrong, at least on one of the previous iterations of the MXR ISO brick, they essentially have a wall wart and then that little skinny cable that DC.
Yeah, and so part of the switching is in the wall wart. Yeah. And they actually say it's not a switching power supply, it is a switching power supply. You just have to get a different plug. And sometimes, I don't know if this one in particular comes with it, but a lot of them will come with plug adapters so that you can go from a US style plug to a European or whatever it is. This is not a linear supply, so they have it wrong there in terms of the universal power switching. It is a switch mode power supply.
My biggest issue with this one that I've had in builds in the past is the wall wart just being a wall wart by definition. It's not anything, MXR has done finding a bad wall wart, but that is usually the point of failure, is the cable that comes out of that bigger brick that plugs into the wall, and that little tiny cable gets moved around quite a few times and eventually fails. Yeah. And so it's not as roadworthy as I'd like. Because
on the outside of it comes in with like a standard IEC, and then it goes into kind of like this plastic box, that has some of the switching technology in it, and then on the output of that, it's kind of like an ordinary power cable, like you get supplied with, most of your pedalboard power supply cables. It's maybe a little thicker because of the voltage and the current that it's carrying. But I know what you're saying, that it's not as robust for sure. And I think if you're going to use this power supply, and I actually did use this power supply for a guitar player named Eric Krasno, I just kind of made it so the only part that was really exposed for you to touch is where the IEC comes in, that connects, the power from the wall into sort of the wall wart module thing. I think I think actually maybe it has a plug on it. Now that I'm remembering it, it is like a wall wart. You know what I did is I took like a female lamp cord, extension cord, and I like Velcroed the power supply plugs, the wall wart against the pedal board, and then I had like a female plug coming in on top of it, and then used one of our power modules. That's what I did.
Nice.
You can watch the video if you're curious about how I did it, but that could be a workaround. Although it's not, it's not as clean as like the Zumo where you just plug in the IEC on the back and then you're done. It's a little bit more complicated. I don't have any objections to this power supply. I don't know if I'd put it 6, but it's and they got some stuff about the features set wrong. Again, it is switch mode. It has a voltage sag thing that doesn't really starve the battery like a battery would, because there's other factors like, current limiting that's happening in addition to the voltage, and voltage is not a static thing on a battery. It's moving around all the time depending on, how hard it's being hit. If we're talking about a carbon battery, which is what most of the battery simulations are supposed to do. I just don't know if I would have put the 6. I don't know that I'd say it's a bad supply though. I think that it can be workable. These, man, 7 I haven't heard in years. The 7 they put the TRex fuel tank Junior. I have seen one of these in probably 10 years. I haven't thought about this in 10 years.
Yeah. I think
this is not switch mode. It's I think it's got 120 milliamp per. So I mean, in the universal power switching, it's got a switch on it, like a slider switch to switch between European and US voltage, but it's not a switch mode power supply. So just be careful on that distinction. I don't see how this is in the top 10 though. Like not by a mile. I don't see how it's in the top 20.
Yeah, I think I've only ever done one build with this in the last 10 years, and I would have no reason to recommend it. I mean, I'm sure it's all right, but again, with the current list that we have in 2023, it's unfortunately, sorry, TRex, not worth mentioning.
Well, I mean, I would say, obviously the Ojai could be here, but that was already mentioned. The True Tone CS6 or CX7 could easily be here. The Chalks 4 or the Chalk Soul, that could easily be here. The Voodoo Lab X8 or X4, those could easily be here, that are in a similar size and price point. I mean, there's just so many options here. Even this MXR ISO brick is like almost the same size. And they say switching, yes, it's not a switch mode power supply. It just has, again, that slider switch. Let's do one more and then we'll break for a moment. So 8 is the True Tone One Spot Pro CS7. Now, actually, I really like this supply, and I would say that this would almost be more appropriate to be in the top 5 as far as well-priced, lots of voltage options. They have 9, 12, 18, and it's capable of, I think it's capable of like maybe 1.5 or 2 amps in total. This is a great budget-friendly power supply that works great. I've used these on many occasions. In fact, I had built several NAMM boards using this, And I think that for the money, they're pretty unbeatable. I think for if you have between 5 and 7 pedals, this is going to be a really, really great compact fit. Takes the IC in the back, no weird stuff with wall warts. Switch mode, works anywhere. I really like this power supply. I think that this to me could or the CS12 or the CS6 could easily all be in the top, top 5 or 6, certainly top 10, with its brother and sister, the CX CS7 and CX12 or CS12.
Yeah, my only issue I've had with these in builds is the height. So they're harder to mount under lower profile boards.
Yeah, they are taller.
But other than that, I mean, they do perform really well, good specs, very good price.
Yeah.
I have to be honest though, I was under the impression that they were linear just because of the sheer size and what looks like, cooling vents on the side. But obviously you're saying they're switch mode, so that's great to hear as well that you wouldn't have any of those
switch
noise
mode.
issues.
There's one, the CS12 has one linear section and there is a slider on the back, and that's only for the AC side because it has an AC outlet for like whammies or, I think that they were thinking about like the Line 6 M series, like the M9 or the M5. Otherwise, the rest of it is all switch mode. But I do like this supply. I actually use them quite a bit. Exactone, another respected rig builder out of Nashville, they use these a lot. They're really great for the money. I do recommend these. Before we finish up their list, let's break for a second, Grant, and you can tell us about some other sponsors that make the podcast possible every single week.
Love to. So the first one I want to chat about is Creation Music Company. So we use these guys all the time. I know Omilion, he was joking, but also very serious last week that if he doesn't have 2 or 3 orders coming from them every week, it's a pretty slow week for him. So all the pedal boards, me and Omilion both love the mini cakes, these plugs that only Creation makes. And so Creation is a great source for pedal board related gear. And you also need to be aware of them as well for the pedal boards and cases, soft bags, all that type of stuff. So parts, accessories, pedal boards, cases, great place to be. creationmusiccompany.com, and you can get 15% off with the coupon code Chairmen15, CHAIRMEN 15. And then the other one I wanted to chat about is a company I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of, is Mono Creators, or we always refer to them as Mono or Mono gig bags. Unbelievable gig bags. Mason has chatted a lot in the past about the dual gig bag that he uses to carry 2 different types of guitars to one gig, so you have varying sounds, easy to transport around. My favorite thing about these guys is also their pedal boards. So they do it's kind of like a pedal train style with improvements, lighter weight, more room underneath, and just really easy to build with and then obviously use after the fact. So their pedal boards are incredible as well. So from gig bags to pedal boards and accessories, definitely one to check out. You can go to monocreators.com and the code is Chairman for 10% off. Lastly, certainly not least, is Bestronix or btpa.com. This is where I go if I can't find something, I need a part for a build or I need some cable. Even just yesterday, true story, I emailed Brad at Bestronix because I needed some cable that had a specific colored jacket that a customer wanted. So I emailed Brad, like, can you hook me up? And Brad is awesome at personalized service and finding those parts that you need. And I would say 9 times out of 10, he's got it in stock and ready to ship. So Bestronix, great place to go if you need some pedal board parts, accessories. I know a couple of these companies do that. All of them kind of stock slightly different variations though. So it's really good to check out these guys and see what they have. So check out Bestronix at btpa.com. You can use the code DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS, DACHAIRS for 10% off of your order. So check out those 3 guys, monocreators.com, BTPA, and then Creation Music Company for all of your pedal board needs.
And tell them the Chairman sent you.
Please do.
All right. Going to go back to the screen share here. and I think I figured this thing out. So we got up to number 8, which is the True Tone 1-spot CS7, and let's see. I think that was it. They made a list of 8. I thought they were going to go with 10.
That's very common.
But they made
Top
a list
8?
of 8.
Yep.
Top 8.
Yep.
So, later on, he gets into some specifics. The writer and talks about some of the things for choosing the best power supply for you, and talks about daisy chaining and the importance of isolated power supplies. I think he glosses over some of this stuff. I think if you really want to know the intricate details of those sorts of things, check out our episode that's specifically about power supplies, because we have a really great one, and it will get into all of those particular details. But I would say that the main takeaways here for me with this article is that it seems, one, really outdated, and it seems like there was maybe a lack of understanding on behalf of the author about what the depth of the offerings were that existed for these companies, and that they had actually, in many cases, whether it be Voodoo Lab or Chalks, had evolved their power supply offerings well beyond what the recommendation was. And I'm not sure if the recommendations were made because they wanted to try to consolidate into just one singular power supply that had as many outputs as possible, and so they chose the ones that they did. But I think at this point, as you said, Grant, if you're not in the switch mode world and you're making power supplies, like, you're on borrowed time. There's no reason anymore with the quality of the technology that we can't have all switch mode power supplies that allow us to be able to use our pedal boards in any country in the world without having to change power supplies or use a step up or step down transformer. There's absolutely no reason for it. There's no reason why we can't have 500 milliamps per output. Almost all of the big makers at this point all offer that. And I could understand having sort of graduated offerings on the top 8 list that reflected different price points. I think the MXR was a good one to have on there for that purpose. I think that the True Tone was a good one to have on there for that purpose. But I also think the other True Tone ones should have definitely been on the list. So if I'm talking about a top 10 list or a top 8 list, in no particular order, because I feel like when you get to a certain threshold, it's sort of like you're just choosing, like, okay, this one is a better fit for the style of pedal board that I have, or I have more 18 volt, options, and so this one's going to be a better fit. I think Chalks 7, 8, 4, and Chalks Soul, all their switch mode offerings, that's up there. Slymon Zuma, Slymon Ojai, all the different variations thereof of Slymon, those are all great. The True Tone CS6, CS7, CS12, Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 3, 3 Plus, X8, X4, those are all great. The MXR one, I think, on a budget can also be a good option. With the ISO brick, we just mentioned some of the challenges with having to plug in the wall wart. I think that those are all got to be top on the list. Are there any other ones that you can think of that we should be mentioning as far as the quality of the power supply that would realistically be on a top 10 list?
Fender. Yeah, I remember you did some tests on the Fender power supplies and you were quite impressed, and they're also at a very fair price point. So I think that's is it the engine room? Is that the series?
The engine rooms, yeah, for the money, they're great. They test maybe a little noisier than some of the higher end ones, but as far as when we talk about noise, it's just like relative to like an infinite number. As far as like what you would actually hear in your signal path, this is well beyond, what you'd hear. As far as using that power supply, it's not like you'd be having all this noise. It would just be, if we're talking about specs relative to some of the other stuff that's out there, it's noisier than that. But is it something that you're going to be able to detect in without instrumentation? No. So that's just kind of the caveat I would just put on the Fenders.
I was thinking while you were chatting, like, what would my top 4 list be if I was to cover some of the main things of feature set, longevity, price? Chalks would still be top of my list, number 1. Strymon or Voodoo Labs would probably be after that, and then the True Tone stuff would be in spot number 4.
Yeah, all
of which I think are great choices and have tons of features on tap. So maybe the Chairman needs to put out their own article with the top 10 list and go from there. But there's a lot more out there, which I know we're running out of time here, Mason, but I think it's always good to cover this as well. Let's say we are the everyday consumer, hobbyist guitar player, maybe we're doing this on the side, or maybe we're doing this professionally. We come across an article like this. How do you weed out what is something you can trust versus something that maybe has been poorly researched, or maybe they're really just after click-throughs for Amazon to get affiliate links or anything like that? Do you have any advice for people listening on how they can be a good judge of character for some of these articles?
I think it sort of goes back to the thing that I said earlier. Obviously being a magazine, there's some credibility that's just, that's going to be established just by way of publishing in a magazine that's very well established, like Guitar Player Magazine. So I think that affords them, a certain authority no matter who's writing it. Unfortunately, in this case, I think that it goes back to the thing that I said where, you don't want your auto mechanic giving you heart surgery advice. I think you go to the people that you say, okay, these guys are in the industry. They are the ones that are, boots on the ground, that are building the rigs. What is it that I'm seeing them using and recommending? And I think that that's usually the best place to start. Because if it's being used by Goodwood, if it's being used by Omilion, if it's being used by, the premier rig builders in the world, that's a good place to start. And if you look at the rigs that most of those companies are building over the last 5 years, a lot of those power supplies are not used at all. And if they are, it would be very rarely. And so I think that's very reflective of like what the professional choice is and what the actual people in the field are doing. I don't know if the guy that wrote this is a rig builder, and I've just never heard of him. But I would just say that it seemed like it was missing a lot of key elements of the things that I look for in identifying a quality power supply. And, I think unfortunately for a reader of that, maybe they'll end up okay for their situation, but I think some of them may end up choosing a power supply that, is vouched for by Guitar Player Magazine that's, already 10 years out of date, comparatively to what else is out there. And so, we certainly want the best for everybody. And, if Guitar Player Magazine comes to us and says, Chairman, we want you to, create a top 10 list of, power supplies or whatever it may be, I'd be happy to do that because I would rather people have the right information. It's just, I think it's interesting when I see these lists, and I just wonder what the motivation is, or if it's just, accidental, or who knows? I can only speculate. But with that said, Grant, I appreciate you diving into this with me this week, and I look forward to having Brian back with us next week so that we can continue similar conversations as we all make our way to Tone Town. And any final thoughts, last words before we complete?
No, I think that's it. I think the advice of going to a rig builder that's doing, maybe 20, 30 plus builds a year. Basically, the only reason I say that is so they've seen a lot of this gear coming through is great advice. And the other thing to think about with that, with hard wearing stuff like power supplies, is when people get a rig build done and they have an issue with their power supply, their pedal board, their pedals, they don't go to the manufacturer. They go back to the rig builder that actually, put the rig together. So it's a very, awesome. We've got another visitor. Our third chairman, Omilion, has gotten a little bit younger, but he's finally joined us. Hey, Oakley. So I think asking a rig builder is great advice because it's in our best interests to put hard-wearing gear on a board so we get fewer returns and complaints from customers. Everyone wins. So I think that's awesome. But those are my only thoughts for today. Love chatting about it.
All right. Well, as you can see, we got joined by Oakley here because
he loves talking
Mama
power
had
supplies.
to go back to work. So Oakley and I are going to hang out for a little bit until our nanny shows. But Grant, as always, great to speak with you about this. And if you have any commentary about this, if you have your own list of quality power supplies, of course, we'd love to hear from you in the comments, or write us an email if you're listening to this on a podcast. And again, we'll link the article that was in question today in the show notes and in the description on YouTube so that you can have a look at it yourself. And if you're the author of the article or your Guitar Player Magazine, you're listening to this, again, we are not intending this as a slight towards you. I think that better information for everybody and the right information is better for the community. And we want to improve the community. We want to pave the road to Tone Town in golden tone. So with that in mind, we will complete for today. Grant, until next time.
See you next week.
See ya.